Hi, I'm Meggy from Colorado Glassworks, and I'm here at the Oceanside Glass and Tile headquarters to make some fun videos teaching you how to cut glass, some little hacks and tips so you can become a better glass cutter. I'm here with Pam from the Oceanside Glass Tile team, as well as Steve from Glass Accessories, Toyo. We're going to cover topics such as why some sheets might be more difficult to cut than others, as well as how to cut glass and what cutter might be best for you. We'll also cover a couple tips like how to cut perfect strips of glass and using a circle cutter. So tune in and we'll go through this series of videos and make you a glass cutting master. Hey Steve, I was wondering if we could talk about glass cutters today and a little bit more on each cutter. You know, sometimes when a student you're learning out, your teacher kind of gives you one cutter and you just sort of gravitate towards that, and I figured we could kind of talk through each one and why one might choose a cutter over another.
Great.
You like sharing?
I'd love to tell you about it. It's a passion of mine. It's been in my life since 1975 when we started this company, and I appreciate you inviting me to be here to talk about them. Yeah, back in 1975, my grandfather actually had retired and he was doing glass cutting and he was using these steel wheel cutters, and somebody approached him with this cutter from Toyo, Japan, and they weren't in America yet, and they had this idea to use tungsten carbide, which at the time was revolutionary because they were only using steel and they would wear out, and they were those little green cutters, and they were hard to hold and hard to grip. And they had brought him this tungsten carbide cutter, and it looked almost just like this. You can see how fat that is, right? I mean, compared to the TC10 today or the TC17, the handle, yeah, it's a little bit different, but still pretty similar, believe it or not.
Yeah.
The other revolutionary thing that they integrated with it was self-oiling, which before 1975, when Toyo brought this to us, there was no self-oiling cutter. This was the first self-oiling cutter available on the market. So you combine better metallurgy, and my grandfather was a metallurgist, it turned out, which is part of the reason he got involved with them, and the self-oiling feature, and my grandfather was in heaven. He was making stained glass lamps and all these windows and all sorts of stuff, and he was out in his shop for hours and hours, and when he got this, it just became a pleasure, and he's like, this is amazing. So even though he was retired, he said, you know, this is something I kind of want to get involved with, and my father and my mother and a cousin and my grandfather started this company. And so what started out with this handle, and it's a little hard to hold, you know, when I was taught to cut glass, I was taught to hold it like that. Yeah, you hold it like a claw, which is a little bit funky and cumbersome, but that's how you'd hold it. And then you make your score and kind of do something like that, right?
Oh my gosh.
But it's still not that hard. I mean,
well, if you have hand strength.
Yeah, a little hand strength, but that is a little harder. And it did have this wide head originally, which now if you go to a flat glass shop, you know, people that just do normal windows and things like that, you'll see these cutters everywhere. This is what they use.
That's their favorite.
And they use this wide head, particularly because when you cut against a bar like this, then it sticks to the bar a little bit nicer than if you have a small head like this. There's a little chance it can wobble. Not much, but a little bit. So that's the difference between the wide head and the skinny head. Actually, they both will do the same exact thing.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing some of your family history tied to your awesome cutters. It's kind of crazy to hear a little bit of the backstory of such a revolutionary tool in the glass world.
Well, I appreciate that, yeah. And actually today, the company's run by my brother Jeff and I, and it's carried on. And a couple of our kids may take it over at some point, we'll see. So after that, my grandfather was getting a little older and he was having some trouble holding the cutter. So Japan really developed this for the most part. My grandfather had some input. They made a few modifications and then it came out. And then going forward, my grandfather also was a woodworker, and I have some beautiful furniture in my house that he made. He was also a self-taught electrician. He owned a plumbing fixture factory originally. He was an engineer. I mean, the guy was into a million different things. So he had trouble holding this and decided to fabricate a wooden handle that would mount right on this. And it looked a lot like that.
Interesting.
So that's how the pistol grip was developed, because he was having trouble. He's getting older. He still wanted to do glass. He needed something where his hand strength, which was diminishing, could be basically augmented by the tool, and he wouldn't have to stop working. So he developed this. And funny enough, around the same time, Toyo was also thinking about it and working on it. So they collaborated and came up with the modern day pistol grip. So
yeah, let's talk about the spread you have here. You've got a bunch of different cutters. They're all different shapes and sizes. In your hand, you have the pistol grip cutter, which you've touched a little bit on about, but you know, I'd love to see each one and talk about their names and how you hold them, and
absolutely
what kind of special perks there are for using each of them.
Great. Well, let me get into that. So the pistol grip cutter is self-oiling, as are almost all of these minus one. And when you put oil in this, first of all, don't put too much oil in it.
Okay.
And just a little bit to just kind of maybe fill it.
Why not fill it up all the way?
Why not fill it up all the way? Well, it's actually, I will say, if there's a mistake in the design of this, it's the size of that well. And when you put that much oil in it, the valve that keeps the oil back just isn't designed to hold back that much volume of oil. It's really just a little bit.
Well, I appreciate the honesty on the design flaw.
But it still works great. You put a little bit of oil in just to kind of fill the finger dips in there. And when you're ready to cut, you open the valve just a little bit. It's like putting your finger over a straw. So it allows, it'll keep the oil from flowing if you close it down, like your finger would over a straw. When you're ready to cut, you open it a little bit, it'll allow the oil to flow.
Very interesting. I find I like to use the pistol grip cutter because I don't have a lot of hand strength. Is that something that you find that people gravitate towards that cutter because of, or?
Absolutely. Like my grandfather was having trouble holding the cutter and he developed that handle. That's exactly why a lot of people like it. They feel like they can control the pressure, but with that also comes the opportunity to overscore glass, and that's something we'll talk about later, but you need to really control your strength. What you're looking for is a real clean score that doesn't pop with a lot of little white flakes. And so when you score it, some people will, I don't even put my hand on the blade. Sometimes you can put a finger on the blade. Some people put 2 fingers on the blade to kind of guide it.
Yeah.
The blade rotates, which bothers some people. And if you want to know why, it's kind of like a shock absorber. So if I'm cutting and I accidentally move my hand a little bit, it won't come offline, whereas if it's totally fixed. But if I want it to follow, I can, as long as I turn here, the blade will follow exactly where I'm going.
There's a reason for that wobble, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Okay, very interesting.
So after the pistol grip came out, we also started working on another cutter. Actually, the next one that's of a slightly different handle style was this Thomas grip. And it was developed by a guy named Cal Thomas, and it was fashioned after a leatherworking tool called a swivel knife.
It's funny you say that. I have a gal that helps me, and she went to school to be a shoemaker, and she saw the tool that that was given to me by you, and she said, we have something just like that with shoemaking. So very interesting. Yeah.
So this little Thomas grip is a little funky. Some people will put the handle right there between the thumb and forefinger and hold it. Some people will put the swoop up between their middle and forefinger and hold it like that.
Why would someone gravitate towards using that cutter?
It's just control. So great question. All these handle styles really, some people feel they get better control out of a different position that you're holding the cutter. And that's exactly what happens here. Some people like this little tiny thing. It just kind of fits in the palm of your hand. It fits between these fingers. You know, there's a couple different ways to do it. You could also do it like that.
Yeah, I can see how it can be kind of a versatile cutter on all the ways that you fit it in your fingers.
Yeah. So after having some success with that, we thought that was pretty neat. We moved on and we developed this custom grip cutter, and this is my personal go-to cutter. I use this one the most. And we call it the custom grip because the paddle itself, as you can see, well, a couple things about it. The paddle is designed much like the Thomas grip to fit in the palm of your hand. Just like that. And it allows me to take the strength of my whole arm and hand and use that, transfer that into the glass as I'm pushing. But I can also hold it like a pencil.
I can feel that. And in the case that I'd want a different grip, is this adjustable at all?
It is, hence the name, the custom grip.
Huh.
Thanks for asking. So the way that happens is you take the little nut off, which is also where you put the oil in. And again, this one isn't quite prone to leaking like the pistol grip. You could fill this one. I wouldn't fill it past the little neck point. When you originally get the cutter out of the package, it's going to have this little collar down below, and that's what I call the second position. You can see how the paddle's now a little bit further away from the cutting head, right? I have small hands. I tend to put it in the first position with the paddle all the way down like that.
And then you'll just screw it back in, I'm assuming?
Yep. Some people have big hands. They want to get the paddle a little further away.
Ah, yeah.
And then the fourth position, you put the collar below and you put the paddle on top. Some people do that just to get it out of the way and they just want to cut with it like that.
Like almost a mini.
Yeah. Some people, if they have giant hands, that'll give them the leverage from that point.
So this cutter's got a lot of great versatility for someone who might want to mix up cutting.
Right. The other fact that some people may not realize, this was the original cutter in the pattern world that had the tap wheel in it. This is where we introduced that tap wheel. And the tap wheel is that zipping sound you hear. Versus a smooth rolling wheel.
There's a slight difference, I do hear that.
And the tap technology is what that's doing. There's little grooves on the inside of this wheel, and it's tapping like a hammer drill so that the score goes deeper into the glass with less effort.
Very interesting. So what would make you want to have that technology in your cutter? Do you think it makes that big of a difference?
It absolutely does, especially on thick glass, and that's where we started with the tap wheel, was on our thick glass cutter, which goes up to 3/4 inch thick glass. And you want that score to go as deep as possible so it'll run as perpendicular as possible. What that also means is you can use a little less pressure on the glass when you're scoring. So your tool lasts longer and your hands get less tired.
Very interesting.
So I use it on all glass, and in fact, our pistol grip now only comes with the tap wheel. For that reason.
That's why I love it so much.
There you go. Multiple reasons. So that's the tap technology and the custom grip.
Okay.
So going through our other cutters, these are kind of variations on a straight barrel cutter. This is a slightly more ergonomic design, and it's real lightweight, right? It's acrylic, so very light, and it's also got some notched grooves in the handle so that if you were to hold it like a pencil, you can do that, and it just kind of fits your fingers real nicely.
You could really hold it in any sort of way.
Yeah. And this does have our smooth rolling wheel in it, but
interesting.
Yeah, and this is a slightly more economical option as well. So it's definitely less expensive than the pistol grip or the custom grip.
Yeah, and for someone who prefers to have their hands in a slightly different arrangement too, I could see that as more of a traditional style.
Right. And then the last two cutters that we've got here today, this is actually our dry wheel cutter right here. I'm gonna set that one down, even though the handle style is the same as the comfort grip, we call it. This is our dry wheel cutter. It's got the same tungsten carbide wheel.
Okay.
So if you never put oil in your cutters, this cutter will last just as long as any other cutter. It's got a real lightweight kind of wood.
It feels much lighter than I would think it would be.
Yeah, it's a plastic handle. It's got a wood grain texture and pattern to it. The head still swivels, and you know, this is the most economical cutter that we have. It's used in a lot of beginner kits. Okay. And it works wonderfully. And you can replace the heads on any of these cutters, so you can just buy a replacement head for any of these. The last cutter that we brought here today is our TC70, and this is our track wheel cutter, and it came out, it's the newest in the cutters. It came out about 3 to 4 years ago. The track wheel, on the outside of the wheel are little micro notches, much like putting snow chains on a tire. Okay. And the reason for that is some people find that when they're going to score glass, especially in a manufacturing situation with oil, the wheel won't start rolling right away, but with these little micro notches on the blade, starts rolling right away. And we recently ran into a gentleman who was cutting kaleidoscopes and couldn't figure out why he was having so much trouble. And he tried out this and he said, my wheel wasn't spinning and I was cutting with oil, and that solved the problem immediately. I've had no problems since. So it's a great little cutter, and the other difference about it is it's got the same acrylic handle as our comfort grip,
Okay.
But it's got the knurled little end, the brass end where the cutter attaches, and it does actually compress for the oil to be released.
Interesting.
On the Comfort Grip, there's no compression. It's not supposed to compress. There's a wick in there and it allows the oil to flow. This one has a valve that allows the oil to flow.
So much different technology.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's really our line of cutters. We have our circle cutter. We'll demonstrate that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But you know, out of all these different handle styles, I think we pretty much can find one that fits most people.
Yeah, it seems like there's a little bit of everything for everyone here, depending on what preference you have. But thanks for sharing all the cutters, and I'm excited to kind of experiment with you a little bit later, cutting up some glass. So thanks,
Great.
Steve.
Thank you.
Let's just talk about putting that cutter to the glass and what's sort of important to know for being successful at getting a good score.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to talk about that. The translucent colors are really easy, especially like a blue or a clear or a black. Find them real easy. The pinks and the whites sometimes are a little harder. That being said, different amount of pressure is required for each glass. And a lot of people ask, well, how hard should I be pressing? There's a couple ways to know if you've got the right pressure. And I tend to like to cut a little bit off my glass first and figure it out before I start cutting a whole bunch of pieces and ruining them. And then I know it's like doing a little
an expensive sheet of glass. Sometimes it might be kind of nice to get a feel for it before you dive in and break it to oblivion trying it. So
100%. And as we were talking earlier, the pistol grip, people really can get a lot of strength down on that glass. So you got to be careful. You can overscore. Some people don't realize that, but the perfect score is going to be a real light score line that you hear, but does not put a white fuzz along it or effervescence along the score line, because when you score glass and then break it, glass is looking for the path of least resistance. We're not actually cutting the glass through, we're cutting the surface of the glass and convincing it to break where we want it to break. I kiddingly liken it to skiing, which is controlled falling. This is controlled breaking, right? So that's what we're doing. And this is what the sound should sound like. And if you can see that, there's no white popping up on that score. In fact, really what you can see is just a little bit of my oil trail. And other than that, and then it's gonna be a super clean run.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know it was possible I knew you could underscore by not pressing your cutter hard enough, but I did not know that you could overscore by pressing it too hard. You just would think that by pressing it as much as you can, it would choose to follow that score line a lot better. That's interesting.
That is the common thought. Here's what happens actually. You're introducing micro fractures along that score line by pressing too hard. And every now and then, especially if it hits a little divot or there's a little unevenness on the surface that you're cutting on, it can cause the wheel to kind of jump on the surface of the glass a little bit, or even that micro fracture, and it's enough just for the glass to say, oh, this is easier for me to go this way. Yeah. So
very interesting. Can you ever start scoring in the middle of a sheet? Where's sort of the best way for someone who hasn't maybe cut glass, a bunch of glass? How do you start a good score line? How much pressure do you know to put? And what if you mess up and lift up sorry, that's a lot of questions, but
a lot of good questions
I just
too.
would love to see the perfect ideal score again, if you
No problem.
Mind.
Let's talk about that. So if you notice when we started this score, we started at one end and went all the way through off to the end.
Okay.
Can you start in the middle? Not really, because glass needs to start at one end and run through to the other end. It's not like paper where you can just cut it out necessarily.
Sure.
Occasionally you'll see people who can do a circle and massage it out, but that's rare. Yeah, that's not easy and rare. So we're looking to go from one end to another. You always have to have a start point and an end point, and you want to go through the whole thing. If you stop your score or start it just a hair inside, the glass is going to pick where it wants to go to finish. It's going to run out.
Okay.
And again, the pressure that you want is you want to hear the scratch on the glass, but you don't want to see that white popping. So when I go to score, I'm going to push down.
And you should hear it every time like that. That nice, crisp
Exactly.
kind of sound.
And that's the tap wheel again. So we just use the tap wheel. If we're using a smooth rolling wheel like the TC10 here, it's going to sound very similar, though a little quieter.
Yeah.
Now you heard my cutter went off the end, and some people say, oh, you can't do that, you're going to chip it. But that's good, actually. I'd rather go off the end a little bit.
Just as long as it's not maybe an aggressive go off the end.
Right, exactly. But especially if you're cutting on a grid like this, like on the Morton surface, it's plastic. It's not going to hurt my tungsten carbide wheel on my Toyo cutter.
Okay.
So it's great. And I like this because my little shards fall in there when I'm cutting. So it gives
me. I
me
have one of these, and I must agree, they're amazing for cutting on.
So anyway, so that's our good score right there. Is you want it to be a light touch, only as much as you need to be able to get the glass to scratch like that and go from one end to the other. And another thing you may consider is angle.
Okay.
You'll notice on the Toyo cutter, it's kind of interesting, but it's got a different angle here than it does on the other side where the screw is. And that actually helps me know exactly how I want to angle my cutter. I want to rock it back just a little bit. The screw should always be up.
Okay.
So you don't screw up. And then you rock it back just a little bit, and that will allow the cutter to follow my hand wherever I'm going. It's a caster. So if I'm doing a big score and I want to go around this way, you'll notice by leaning it back, it tracks exactly where my hand goes.
I see.
I didn't even put a finger on the wheel.
Now what happens if, say I'm cutting a particularly difficult piece of glass and, I've lifted up, my dog barked and I lifted up my cutter in the middle of cutting. What do you do? What do you do if you're...
Great question. What I will typically do is if I've gotten halfway through, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Don't rescore. You never want to go back over a score.
Okay. So
what I will do is you can feel the groove of where the score was and go right to the end of that and just pick it up and keep going.
Okay. So never ever go backwards.
Never go backwards.
The myth is, or not the myth, but what they say is true. It's bad for your cutter to go backwards.
They do, and it is kind of bad. It will beat up your wheel a little bit.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a file on your wheel because the glass edges are real sharp, and so you can wear down your wheel. It's not great, and it's not necessarily going to do anything better for your score. So.
Okay.
Go
Can I
ahead.
ask you another question?
Yeah.
Can I see what it looks like to overscore a piece of glass?
Oh, great question.
Can you see it?
Absolutely. So we talked about it a little bit earlier, and since the pistol grip is one of the great tools for overscoring because you can push so hard, let's try that. First of all, you can hear it.
Oh, yeah.
And look at that. You can easily see all that white popping up there. That is the sign of an overscore.
Okay.
And also, especially when you're fusing, you'll see those little marks on the surface of the glass. You want a really clean break like this. And you can see how perpendicular that is too. I mean, it's perfect, and there's no little rivulets or anything on that line. And if you go to score that, put that in a kiln and melt it together, it's going to be a super clean line when you put your two pieces of glass together. Whereas if you have all the little pieces from that, you may have to grind it to try and clean it up, or you'll see some of those little pieces when you
you can tell just
when you
the way
fuse
the
it.
Glass breaks right there too, with a difference with an overscore. You can see it's a lot. It looks different.
Actually, let's run that score and you can see the difference. Can you see the little at the top?
Yep, I can see where it's not as smooth, and it's got a lot of these like little divots on the inside. So it's crazy that it changes the glass so much. You wouldn't think that little simple score line, even though it broke very cleanly, that it's not as clean of a piece as this. So, interesting.
It'll actually run like butter when you get the perfect pressure on your score.
Okay.
It feels good. So anyways, those are some tips and tricks to how to cut. I think one other thing that might be good to know is sometimes glass has little seed pockets in it. Or
Okay.
some glass is more textured than others, right? And there isn't necessarily, especially in hand-rolled glass, let's say like a Ouroboros, their glass.
You can kind of see the seediness in some of this, in this sheet right here.
Right. So sometimes your glass cutter will hit a little piece like that, and people will get stuck, and it's a little bit frustrating. And the best thing to do is just take a breath and relax. We're gonna hit this one. Oh, I hit it. You can stop, and sometimes I'll just use my thumb and just push through it until I get just past it, and then I can keep going.
And as long as you keep that pressure, you'll still be fine and it'll break.
Yep.
Okay?
It'll be no problem. So let's run this thing.
Beautiful.
There you go.
Okay, well, thank you for kind of walking me through cutting glass out and how to get the perfect score line. I really appreciate your help, and I'd love to talk about running pliers and just breaking glass, different techniques to break glass, if you're okay with talking about that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Since you got to do that right after you score anyways, that's a
Yeah.
natural.
Okay.
Let's get into it. Let's talk about breaking glass.
Yeah, let's talk about the fun stuff. So I know there's a couple ways to do it, and I break glass in a couple different ways, but maybe we can talk a little bit back and forth about the ways we both know how to break glass. And
Absolutely. I mean, so when you're working with glass, there's two parts to it. You got to score it, which is telling it where you want to break it, and then the actual breaking. So we'll run through a few different methods, and none of them are right or wrong. They're just all different tools to get to an end. And sometimes some work better than others, depending on what you're doing.
yeah,
So we'll start with just breaking down a sheet. We have a 12 by 12 here, and we want to break it down. So the easiest thing for me is to score against a bar.
okay,
It's just faster. If you try to draw a straight line freehand and put a ruler up and draw a line against a ruler, it's faster.
that works as well too.
Well, it works as well, and it's faster. Because if you're trying to draw a straight line freehand, you're going slow, trying to be careful. But
Also, it's nearly impossible.
there you go. So,
That too.
anyways, this Morton system gives us a nice, easy way to
And so,
go ahead and make a straight line, and the easiest way to get a super clean break. Go ahead.
oh no, so you're gonna use the table to break
I'm
the
gonna
glass.
use the edge of the table, and if we had a big 24 by 24 sheet, this is way easier. So we're just gonna take it right here. I have the edge of the score line is right at the edge of our table. We could use the edge of our surface too if we wanted to. I'm just gonna bam,
Bam.
and that's it. Super
Nice, clean.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. So it's just fast and easy. And if you're doing a bunch of big sheets, it's so easy just to score, whack, score, whack.
Okay.
So I like that. Next, let's talk about,
How about our handy tools, our running and our grossing pliers?
oh good.
Let's talk about those.
Running pliers. So basically when you get glass to break, you're bending it. You're literally bending it, which is why on your running plier, you'll notice it's curved.
Sort of that little
Right.
curve
and
up.
it's curved in a particular direction, right?
Yeah.
The reason for that is we're trying to bend the glass. And again, screw up. Has to be up.
So you don't screw up.
Exactly. And don't take the rubber boots off your running pliers if you're
Okay.
using running pliers, because it's buffering the glass on there so you're not metal to metal. These set screws are funny. You can use them. I don't think I've actually ever seen anyone use it.
I've never used them,
Most
so.
people back them out. So even if your screw is gone, at least you know where the screw went, and that helps you remember which direction you should be holding your running plier. So, and there's always a line on the running plier.
Okay.
And that little line should be the side that's touching the score. So another way to know that you're in the right direction. So here, why don't you make a score?
Does it have to be straight?
It does not have to be straight.
I'll make it slightly curved because you don't always have to do straight lines. There's a certain capacity to do more curved lines, but at some point it might break. So I won't do an extreme curved line, but I'll do a slightly curvy line.
Very nice. So now when you use your running plier,
I'm gonna
put this little line in line with your score, exactly like you have it, and gently press. There you go.
Boom.
Now, if you had a longer piece and it only went part of the way through your score, there's no rule that says you can't flip it around and run it backwards as well.
See, I've heard that you should do that because it breaks better that way. Is there any truth to that? All opinion?
Yeah, it works great for some people. I've done that before, and especially if it only runs part of the way, then I do that for sure.
Okay.
It does seem to give you a real clean edge on both ends. So
Interesting. So running pliers and grozing pliers, they're used for different kind of cuts with glass. Typically, do you feel like these pliers are better for, bigger sheets, big straight lines?
So, yeah, when you have a fair amount of glass left on either side of your score, at least enough to get this onto the glass, this is just the easiest and gets the cleanest score run,
Okay.
I find.
Okay.
Sometimes, though, if you have a real tiny little piece and it's skinny, you may not be able to get your running plier on there. It's going to be off the edge. And so that's when we get into a grozing plier. And what we do, as opposed to going in line with the score, we're going to go perpendicular to the score.
And you're going to create that pressure with your thumb and the pliers by creating sort of that same bend that the bigger pliers do.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to basically, you're opening the score.
Okay.
It's like opening the score.
And how do you know which side of the grozing pliers is the right side? Which is face up, since there's not a handy screw.
I usually make it so it's smiling at me.
I always say alligator mouth.
Oh,
It looks like an
alligator
alligator
mouth.
mouth.
Yep,
The
that
flat
works.
part's the top, and then the bottom is sort of the mouth to the alligator.
Exactly. So I put that right up on the score, and I'm putting the jaws right up to it.
Okay.
And I'm going to be, this is the action I'm going to be using. I'm going to be,
I always call it kind of breaking. You're kind of,
Yep.
I mean, you're breaking down, but then some people are like, no, you're going up. So
yeah, it's kind of you're opening the score.
Yeah.
That's basically what I'm trying to do. And nothing also says that you have to do it all in one piece. So I can start loosening it here, and I can loosen it a little bit here, and I can loosen it a little bit here, and just kind of weaken that joint, and then it just
see,
pops right out.
that's something new for me. I didn't know that you could or do you want to do that?
Yeah,
So
because actually what I can be doing is getting the score to start running along that line, and then it goes. Now let's say you are doing a little tiny piece on a little tiny piece. Now that's even harder, right? So
Yeah.
if I flip this around, not 100% sure this is going to work, but let's give it a run.
hey, that's
I need to cut
that's
this in
glass
half.
work.
Now, I might be able to get my running plier on there, but let's say I can't. Sometimes they're just so small. I can't hold this with my hands. So
Yeah.
It's real convenient to have a second grozing plier.
I'm going to be impressed if this works.
Too much pressure.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good.
So there you go. Sometimes you need two.
Okay. What's the coolest way to break glass that we haven't talked about yet?
Oh, the coolest way. Well, the glazers, these guys with giant forearms, they'll just do it with their hands, right?
You're kind of cool if you can do it with your hands.
There's something about that, right? It's kind of fun. So you get a score like this. Again, it's just the same action. And what I do is I put my fingers on either side underneath the score line. And then I've got my thumbs on either side, and I'm going to do this.
You're going to create that same pressure.
Yeah.
Boom.
You're basically just pulling the glass apart.
Yeah, that's the coolest way to do it. Honestly.
But the reality is, what you want is equal pressure on either side of the score so that it ends up with a real perpendicular edge.
Okay.
And actually, right where I had my fingers, it did kind of slope in a little bit because my pressure wasn't perfectly equal on either side. Whereas on a running plier, that's one of the advantages to using a running plier is you can get that perfect, a little more equal pressure. Another tool you can use is the Morton safety brake system, which actually is a two-part little system here. And again, doing skinny pieces with the Morton system is pretty easy. So let's say I want to divide this piece in half. I can use the safety brake, and you lay it right on top of the score. And then my finger goes directly under the score.
Okay.
And again, it's just bending the glass. This is bending, it's bending right there. So when I put the glass on there, it's gonna help bend the glass.
Perfect, wow.
That worked great.
Another little break too.
Now, if I need to cut this one in half, it's gonna get even tighter, right?
Again, I'll be impressed.
Ah.
But you're kind of a glass master, so.
Not really. So anyhow, now I'm gonna divide this one. Now getting even my finger on this one would be difficult, but the safety brake has this other little feature, and this becomes my finger, the fulcrum point. And notice it's curved. It's a little dome. Place it right anywhere in the grid system, and I lay my score right on there, and then I use this block, which is basically like
the same thing.
The same thing, just with a paddle handle. And I place it with the score running this way, and I put a line on mine so I can remember which way to go. I line that up with the score, and I'm gonna try to press with equal pressure on either side, and just gently press it. And again, the nice thing about this, unlike running pliers, is that I can massage the score line all the way down because I don't have to be right on the end. I can do it from any side, right?
Wow.
Bam. There you go. So you can get
Look
some
at
real
that.
little tiny pieces, which is kind of nice.
Well, so there's so many ways to break glass. It just seems like it just depends on the situation and what you'd like to do. But yeah, we've got some good options on how to break glass after we've scored it perfectly.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for sharing, Steve. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Oh, I should put my glasses back on. Safety first.
Oh, safety first. Safety first. So, Steve, I heard you know a little secret on how to cut perfect strips every time.
Ah.
Are rumors true?
The rumors are true, and I wish I could lay claim to it, but I learned from others. It's definitely not a secret, but not everyone's heard it, so let's share it.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Sometimes somebody will look at this big piece of glass and say, oh, I only need a little strip off of it, and they would try to score a little tiny strip and break it off.
Yep.
And you can do it, it's been done.
It's
so difficult, right?
I can attest
And so
to that.
the best rule to follow is what I call the law of halves. It's so much easier to cut things in half, and then in half, and then in half, and just keep going in halves. So I don't need this whole piece of glass, and I actually don't want to cut it in half because I don't even need the full half. So I'm not going to go completely to half, but at least if I have closer to a half when I make my first run, I got a much better chance of having a nice clean run, and then everything after that can be in halves, and I can get down to real small pieces. So that's what we're going to do. And the other great thing about using something like the Morton system here is I can actually run a bunch of different strips before I even start, or I can score a bunch of strips at the different increments that I need and then run them all at once.
And even measure them as well here, since you've got a handy little ruler as well to say, okay, you know, I have a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch strip. Since you said that you're cutting different strips, I figure it's probably nice to have a ruler at the
Absolutely.
edge of it too.
Absolutely. And the Morton system will allow you to get as precise as you want, or you can be close. And this, I like their little ruler system here. It's pretty neat. It's got American units on one side and then metric units on the other. So you can flip it around and work in whatever units you want. In this case, we'll just go to American units. Most people are used to that. However, I will say, I like working in metric system because dividing 36 is way easier than 2 3/8.
That's fair. That's a fair feeling.
So regardless, let's go here. Let's start. We're going to do a couple of 1-inch strips first.
Okay.
Let's say I need 2 1-inch strips for my project. So I'm going to go ahead and score those down. And I like the wider head against this bar. It does make it just a little more meat to score. That's great. There's my first one. Now I'm going to move my score line down to the 1 right on the ruler. So I'm getting 2 1-inch strips. And that's helpful. Now for my project, what's the next size we need?
Let's do a 1/2 inch.
1/2 inch?
Cut it in half, yeah.
All right. So now I'm going to move my latest score line I made to the 1/2 inch mark. And I'm going to go ahead and make a couple scores there. And I'll do one more. There we go. If I had to be extremely precise, I would be using stops, they call them, which are little blocks that you can put in and it'll only move to where that block is. Here I'm eyeballing it. It could be off by a fraction, maybe a 64th or a 32nd, but it's all a matter of how precise you want.
A pass.
I'm gonna get a pass on this one?
Yeah,
all right.
Maybe a pass on this one.
Thanks. How about 1/4 inch? You need some 1/4 inch strips?
Yeah.
All right, let's do a couple 1/4 inch strips. All right.
I want to see how thin you can cut strips. Oh my God.
So now we've got all our scores. We got 2 1/4, 2 1/2, and 2 1 inch. So I'm gonna start with the innermost score. That's the one we're gonna run first.
Okay.
Oh, like butter. Look at that. Came right off. And now I'm looking for 1/2. So I'm gonna go to the middlemost score. Butter. Our 1 inch scores.
Beautiful.
And again, I'm gonna go to the one that's closest to the middle. It doesn't have to be, but it definitely runs much easier. There we go.
This is our 1/2 inch.
1/2 inch.
Boom.
And then we've got our 1/4 inch. Ooh, now look at that. It went part of the way, it didn't go all the way, but I'm just gonna keep running it right along the score line there. There you go. So I just kept running and pushing with my finger along the score line and bam.
Wow, look at that.
There you go. Now we're gonna try it again. Now this one, okay, so my finger's having trouble getting on there, so I'm gonna switch to this. And I like this because again, I have a lot of control. I could maybe use a running plier on this too. I could use a grozer. We're gonna align this with the score line. I drew a line on mine. It aligns with the score and press. And then I'm gonna keep running it down the line.
And so you're just encouraging that
I
to
am.
break perfectly, right down the middle.
Exactly. Oh, did you hear that?
I heard it. I think you're
And
gonna
you
get
can
lucky.
You can actually back up a little bit. You can go forward. Looks like we're getting there. That sounded pretty good to me. We got a little piece back here. We're gonna come back and just make sure.
I see it.
You see it?
I see it, yep.
Nope, it's real close.
Oh,
There
look
we go.
at that.
Couple of
Magic.
strips. So 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1 inch strips, real easy. So that's the law of halves when you're running glass, and that's the secret.
The key to the perfect strips. Well, thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Another shape that people sometimes have a hard time cutting out is circles. You can cut them out by hand, but a lot of times they come out kind of ugly. But Steve here has a system to get a perfect circle nearly every time. So Steve, if you feel like sharing, I'd love to see your perfect circle trick.
Absolutely, I'd love to show you our perfect circle trick. So this is the Toyo Circle Supercutter.
Okay.
The TC6025. And what that means is actually it'll do a 25-inch diameter circle, 6025. Okay. That's why it's named that way. And this bar right here helps you determine what size circle you're gonna make.
Okay.
So it is demarked, and you'll see it's got 5, 7, 9, 11. That's the diameter of the circle you're gonna cut. So let's say we want to do a 9-inch diameter circle. Comes with this neat block. Pop the block on, and there's a chamfered little edge right here.
Okay.
You can see that, and I always put that towards the inside, towards the middle. And then I move it to just where the 7 is on here, or the 9. Let's go to the 9. We're going to do a 9-inch circle.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yep.
And then I'm going to lock it down. Oh, come on. There we go. So we're right on the 9. And it's in 1/4 inch increments. The other way to do it is draw a line on your glass and measure off. And then the suction cup, which is actually attaching to the glass, also has demarcations on it, so you can align it. And I highly recommend using those.
If you're trying to be specific.
If you're trying to be specific, yes. So it's got a suction cup, and Oceanside glass tile glass is so flat, most all of it, the suction cup will stick to it. And you can pick the glass up, so it's not going anywhere.
Dang.
Which is awesome, because then it's holding the glass in place. Another neat thing about cutting on something like the Morton system is I can lock this glass right into place, so I don't have to worry about it wobbling on me. or moving anywhere.
Pretty important too for cutting circles at least.
It's just more convenient. I'm using the square down here to hold that end, and then I'm using 3 of them because it's a big piece of glass. You could also do it on a surface that's not going to move so much, you know, something that's got a little friction to it.
Okay.
Now this circle cutter is not small, it does occupy some space. So we gotta check and make sure before we cut anything that it's gonna make it all the way around. Oh, you already found one of our obstacles, yes. And we are clear, so that's nice.
Save the day.
That's right. Now another thing I'll do, sometimes if you're cutting textured glass, this is not gonna stick. I don't care what circle cutter you have. The suction cup, if there's texture, air will get underneath, and suction obviously is the vacuum of the air up, so it's gripping on, so you're gonna have to hold it. But it can move. One of the nice things about having the circle cutter here with these little marks is I can actually mark where those marks are, and if the circle cutter happened to come up during my scoring, I can just realign it and continue my circle, which I have done before, and it works great, believe it or not. So pop that back in there. All right, we're clear around. The other thing I like to do is, and I'm a fan of cutting with oil. We haven't talked a ton about oil, but the lubrication on cutting not only prolongs the life of your tool because it has less friction on the actual tool. It also helps keep the score open a little bit, according to some, so that it's easier to run. I don't know if it's 100% true, but I definitely find that it saves my tool. My tools last longer, and I find the scores are easier to make when it's lubricated. So now that I got a little oil on there, I'm just gonna run the track around. This is self-oiling. You could put oil in there if you wanted to, if you're doing a whole bunch, but one cut, I just put a little drop on there and we're good. I always start at one spot because I don't want to run over my score a second time. I put one hand or finger on here just for good practice, even though we saw it suck down. And then I'm gonna start at 3 o'clock here with just light pressure. This tool almost cuts by itself, yeah. You can hear the score line. Again, if I start seeing white popping up, I'm pushing too hard.
Okay.
So just all the way around. Bam, that's it.
So you can pop it out just like that.
Yes, just like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, right? We're gonna break into that building and we're gonna pop that glass right out. Almost. No. So one of the neat things, you know, everyone talks about, oh, so now you're gonna make those breakout score lines, right? Yes, but not yet. So one of the tricks to making really smooth circles come out of glass is to run the score first before you actually try to get it out. So I'm gonna move these out. And the way to do that is we have to get the score to run. So I flip it upside down and I use some sort of a surface that's got a little bit of give to it. This stuff works, shelf paper works, newspaper works, almost anything like that. I flip it over and I start in a corner because I have the most leverage on that point. And I'm gonna put my finger right on the score line and gently press. And you'll see the score start to run. Oh, I felt it. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah, you didn't even barely touch it and it just
barely touched it. Some people like to only touch the corners after that. I like to chase the score, I call it. So I just keep going around and you can see it's running all the way around, right? So what that's done now is it has actually broken the surface tension all the way through the glass. Now it doesn't just pop out because we haven't removed any glass. So all the same amount of glass is still there holding it together. So that's why we're gonna have to do our breakout scores. But at least right now, it has broken completely perpendicular all the way through the glass. And now we're just gonna release it out.
Set it up in a way where it's going to break the way we want it to.
Absolutely. You can also, if it's a real hard glass, sometimes come back to the side we scored and give it one more little press. Oh, you hear that?
Yeah.
It's actually releasing itself.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up cutting only a 9-inch circle out of a 12-inch piece of glass. I could get away with less meat on the edge here if you're trying to save your glass so you're not wasting as much. I'd like to leave maybe a 1/2 inch of glass, something like that. You want enough to where it's gonna hold itself together so we can get this clean breakout. All right, so we're gonna move this out of the way.
I'm excited.
Now,
I'm excited to break this circle out.
Some people, there's 2 different ways to do your breakout scores. One is perpendicular.
Okay.
And the key to that is don't cross the line. You don't want to encourage your breakout score to run through your circle. So I always start at my score line. I feel it a little bit, and then I go away from the score line, right? Start again here and go away from my score line. And one more. The other way to do this is a tangent. And if it's a tiny circle, I will use tangents, because what that does is I would start here at the line and come away, and that way when I run the score this way, it'll go around and keep going around. The downside is you may end up with little triangles right at that tangent point. But if we get this to run out, it's gonna be super clean.
Okay.
It's kind of high risk, high reward, right? So low risk, but more work. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and...
I think this circle is gonna break in our favor. Boom.
I think so too. So there you go.
Didn't even break that last score.
Nope. And there you go.
Perfect circle.
Yeah, and look at how straight those edges are. It's totally
You would
perpendicular.
Just barely have to dust it.
There's
with a
nothing.
grinder.
I wouldn't even grind that, actually. That's ready to go. I would just clean that with some glass cleaner and you're done.
Wow. Well, there you go. That's how you make a perfect circle. Thanks for showing us, Steve.
You're welcome.
Woohoo! And that's a wrap.
All right.